So the first question of our survey, and I think it is a central one, is just why is metadata important at all? Is it just a minor issue? The fact that so many of you have your phone, have held your way here, tells me it's not a minor issue. Maybe we start with you, Katie. Why do you think metadata is important?
Well, it's important for a lot of different reasons, but mostly because so that you can find what you're looking for as a consumer. I'm of the opinion that metadata isn't quite as challenging today as it was maybe 5 years ago, even 2 years ago, because stores and labels have made a really strong effort to clean things up and to sort of follow some level of standards. But yeah, I mean, in general, metadata is important for classical because there's a level of detail that both, exclusively classical consumers and also novice classical music listeners need to find what they're looking for. Okay, Serge, Lukas, that's exactly why you...
Yeah, I mean, I would completely agree, obviously, with that. I think actually classical music is really under threat here because streaming or downloads, clearly that is the future, that are the most that people are consuming music, and especially new audiences will turn to streaming. And if they can't find classical music there properly, then they get frustrated and then they simply turn away and then they turn to pop, which is for the genre for which almost all streaming and download platforms have been designed. And obviously we all know what happens. You search for Beethoven Symphony, and what you get is a recording of a Bruckner Symphony by the Beethoven Orchestra in Bonn, which is nice, but it's not what you were looking for originally. And yeah, I think it's really, really important that metadata is not just collected and stored, but it's also being used. And that also means that you have interfaces, that you have search engines that can actually deal with that metadata after it has been collected. So that's just two separate things, but they are closely linked, obviously.
Yeah, there's some saying, I think it's not about metadata, not where it comes from, but it says, I read it in a restaurant, they put it on, and they have a saying there every day, and it says, if you are looking for something that is very defined, you will definitely find something, which is like what many of us do, I think, searching for things. You discover a lot of things you actually wasn't looking for, and you like that, but it would maybe be nice, especially with classical music, if you could exactly find what you were looking for in the first place. Also in your own record collection and in the download sector, actually, which is Philippe, where you come into play.
Yes, it's similar. I mean, they intersect with the streaming. The problem on a large collection of CDs, you could never see your entire catalog if, for example, Beethoven is written differently. If you have a capital V and a small v, so which means you can never have your collection together. Performers the same. I think the records, it's Academy of Saint Martin in the Fields that I found, 20 different spellings. So they should be normalized in basically one way to have a reference. So there is what you're looking for, but also the unicity of the concept at the name level. And it's not that difficult. It's text processing. We're not talking nuclear reactor, so it's a small database, really, as database goes. I mean,
I think there's a website, 356 ways to write Britney Spears. And I think for classical, you could do that with Rachmaninoff or Tchaikovsky easily.
Oh, yeah. The Russians are really...
And that's only where it starts. But, I mean, we all know why metadata is important, probably. I just wanted to have that as a start, and you see the answers on the sheet. But what is more important to talk about now in this limited time we have is maybe the issues we have. And maybe I open the round for a few statements right here already now. What are the issues you feel are the most pressing with metadata, except for the fact that it's generally not as as cleaned up as we wanted to, and that you cannot exactly find what you want to in many platforms. I mean, try to put in Beethoven in iTunes and it will help you not at all. Anybody?
Yeah. Okay, well, we all have horror stories about metadata disasters. I mean, working for Hensler Classic, when we first processed our first streaming downloads through IOTA, we got 19 different spellings for J.S. Bach. That's a simple name, 19 there. But the far more pressing problem is that all of these media companies that are processing the streaming and download files, they should have a dashboard so that the actual content owners can make corrections to the file. Because unfortunately, what we found out with IOTA is that the mistake was easy to make and possible to correct. So it's permanently in their system. And one other complaint that I'm finding is that several labels that I work for, they're being included in the YouTube jukebox play. There's absolutely no metadata. All of the tracks that are being uploaded are virtually unsearchable on YouTube.
Thank you, thank you. That brings us to the finger pointing, the sport of finger pointing. With I think in this, no, nothing against that. It's just we often find it the case that we say, the distributors should, and then the distributors say, what would the distributors say if somebody said, well, the distributors should?
Well, I used to work for IOTA prior to working for the Orchard, and I'm assuming that when the Hensler catalog was uploaded, in this specific instance, it was a very long time ago, before there were any sort of standards. And today, the major services have a specific standard. They want everything, this applies to new content from probably, 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, that didn't exist before. So there is still a lot of content out there, which is, it's messy, but today standards are much different. So there is a standard for spelling J.S. Bach, and for Tchaikovsky or Rachmaninoff, a preferred spelling. It's by no means a standard across the board, across every single service, but it's improved greatly. But
I would agree that it has improved, but I would say we're still far off a situation where we can say, okay, now this at least works decently. It does not, and I think the biggest problem is that we still mix up works, which is compositions, and albums, which are recordings. Because if you have those always combined as one entity, you're prone to run into the same errors over and over again.
It's just that they didn't create a composition field.
Yeah, exactly.
So, which is mind-boggling, actually.
Yeah. So it's just a name of a track, and this is basically a list of words. It's the same with the artists. The artist can be a composer, but it can also be obviously a performer. And this is not. It's not distinguished, right, differentiated in any sense. So as soon as you start searching for certain performance, you run into issues. And if I search for Leonard Bernstein, for example, then I want to have basically two lists. I want to have a list of the works that he composed, and I want to have a list of the works that he conducted and composed, maybe. But this is something that is not possible on all the major platforms at the moment, and for classical music, it's a big problem.
I have another issue. When I go to a streaming service and I want to listen to a piece of classical music with a choir, an orchestra, conductor, a very long composer name maybe, then I click on the tracks that I want to listen to, or on the album, on the piece, and what I see is 8 pieces that start with the exact same name for about 30 letters or 50 letters, because it's the conductor and the composer and the choir, and then it's truncated. So I have no idea what movement I'm listening to, and it's not possible to see it. This field wasn't programmed in a way in the service that I could actually see the data that is there. So I think the issue often is also that the classical music consumer is not taken seriously when they design the interface. So it's not. Is it only the metadata, or Philippe, you? No. Yeah.
So I'm not saying they even think about the classical music. most of the guys who program are younger and they don't listen to that type of music, and so they have no idea. Period. So that's why it's not planned. I mean, somebody will eventually. As far as text, the problem is at the theoretical level, because all the searches you find in any sites are based on full text searching processing. Basically, they take words and they index them. But it's not structured in a sense that you could say, I want a composer, I want this. So that's expensive to implement, structured search. But that's the only way one could find something. So as long as all these services play the cheapo card, which is, let's use the building full text search, it'll be a mess. The first one who does structured search will win them all.
Is there anybody who wants to share another issue, another aspect of it? Yeah.
I think one issue, one problem with classical metadata is the language in which you write the piece. I mean, there are several ways. Maybe you stick to English, and then you will at one point run into a place where you don't have an English translation for this piece, and then you start using the original language, and so this is difficult to standardize, I think.
Yes.
Absolutely. It's super difficult, and you just have, you have to make a decision there, basically, and you have to start somewhere. I think this is maybe what I learned over the last few years is really, it's so easy to say, oh, and here's a difficulty, and this is difficult, and that is difficult. Oh, it's rocket science. Oh, we cannot do it. Oh, let's just leave it the way it is. But you can start somewhere, and you can basically say, okay, we do this in English to start with. But if someone searches in let's say La Mer in French or in German, then you can still find something, and then there will be people who say, oh, I could still not find it, but it's a starting point. You can start somewhere. But it's absolutely true. What do you want to display? Do you want to display the original title, or do you want to display the title in that language that person is navigating your website?
We're so far off. I mean, we're so far off that to consider multi-language would be such a great refinement, actually. But to work in one language would be already pretty nice.
And I think you make a good point, though. I mean, there's only so many hours in the day. There's so many resources. I mean, you've had that experience with your own service. You have to cater to, the masses and not to a small, sector of the market, and that's why the services haven't built this functionality for the aficionados. I mean, it works well for discovery. Somebody who knows nothing, they can usually find something that they think they're looking for, but for somebody like you who is very particular about what you want to do at organization, I think it's...
Most classical music fans are pretty definite to what they look for, though.
I mean, in general, I think that this is the problem. Again, we are talking about, okay, we have here our core audience. This has been addressed in several other panels as well. We have the core audience, the aficionados, right. And then we have the mainstream, and that is basically here your easy listening playlist and more Moonshine Sonata, more Vivaldi Four Seasons. Have fun with it, and we pretend that there's nothing in between, but there's a lot in between. There are a lot of people who they grew up listening to classical music, never really got into it, and then they are at the point in their life where they rediscover it, and they know a few names. They know maybe Berlin Philharmonic, they know Karajan, and that's what they look for then, and that's what they get, but nothing else. And every new artist, every new ensemble, they fall through the system, and that's a really sad thing, especially if you're a record label or the artists themselves, and you're trying to promote those artists, and you just cannot get visibility or reach visibility on all of those platforms.
There was a sentence you had on your website. I think it was classical music is too valuable to be dumped down by easy listening players, and the other part was to be an only expertise thing. Or how did you coin it?
I don't know how exactly I phrased it, but it's basically, it's we dumb down the audiences by not giving them a chance to properly discover classical music.
Which brings us to the question: what you are doing with your day job?
This is actually the three issues that we sort of discovered or think are most important. So obviously the complex structure of classical music, and it's basically going through this massive meat grinder at the moment, ends up on all those platforms, but it's hard to find what you're really looking for. Then you have basically the only solution that is proposed is this basically addressing two stereotypical audiences, the geeks with specified specialized websites, or the other extreme, you just get your easy listening playlists. And the third issue, slightly related because it also is data that you collect, is obviously that if you count tracks on streaming platforms for remuneration purposes, then a symphony or a symphony movement, which is 25 minutes long, makes the same amount of money as a pop song that is 2.5 minutes long, which basically leads to a lot of redistribution of revenue from classical listeners on mainstream platforms towards pop artists, which is problematic in itself. Our background is we're Gramophile. We are aiming to basically raise the profile of classical music in the digital music streaming environment. We have started by developing a tagging system and database that actually accounts for the special characteristics of classical music. We've developed a search engine and are now looking to develop a user interface that still makes it very accessible. So it's kind of, you add complexity on a back-end side, metadata side, and then you try to make it still easy and accessible for a broader audience, and actually use the complexity in the back-end to make it more accessible. So that's where we're coming from. We're working closely with a couple of labels already. Signum Records are supporting us, also Live, London Philharmonic Orchestra. And we are trying to develop a first very small streaming platform to showcase basically what you can do if you get the metadata sorted and put it into a great framework and user interface.
Thank you. Katie, the Orchard and the head of classical of the Orchard, what do you do?
Well, we are a large distributor of classical music and all other types of music. I personally look after a number of classical labels, as well as dealing with the retail relationships specific to classical, as well as just the major retail like iTunes and Amazon, Spotify.
Okay. Thank you. Philippe, you developed a tool and an additional service just now, but the tool is on the market, if you can call it like that.
Working now. At first, we developed a suite of software for the consumer, which was just a digital player, tag editor, Reaper, but could understand classical music out of the box. So if the metadata was correct, you would use it. Then an offshoot of that project is this service that we are launching, which is a big database which has 10,000 composers, many performers, and the complete catalog of composition of the top 125 composers, but in a structured way. And there's a request grammar you send to the internet, and you get back the answer. This is good for labels, for maybe music vendors, which very, very cheaply could actually clean the metadata mess, because if you put Rachmaninoff in a certain way, you'll get it in one way. English, American English actually versions, and also some French stuff I can put in. But bottom line is, you can actually, of course, it's an IT department that would have to do that, but you basically send request of your catalog, your website, your CDs, whatever, and you will come up with, if there's one answer, well, then you know hopefully it's not a false positive, it's a good one. And it usually is. And if you have a few possible choices, you be prompt and say, okay, is it that one, or not that one? So any corporation, I guess, could use these tools to clean this mess. And I wouldn't say this mess, but it's normalize the data sets in a very cheap way. So
good. Thank you. So, Katie, you're quite optimistic. You think if things are improving as we speak, so to speak. Lukas, you're more the representative of looking at the search, having the metadata in the background, but the search engine, sorry to to focus here.
Yeah, sure.
Philippe, you're talking about the background metadata and how to clean that up from the label side, for example?
From whoever side.
From whatever side. Yeah, it's about the finger pointing.
Something really quickly on this.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, the reason why it's so difficult is, I'm talking from a consumer now, because I buy music and I see what I get. This industry structures with two big black holes. You have the labels. First black holes goes to the distributors who do whatever they do. Black holes, you never know what's happening. Sorry, no insults.
Distributors even less.
Then the second black hole will be from the distributors to the media shop. So to have one black hole to actually shake hands, really hard. When you have two, very, very, very difficult. And unless you guys, I said you guys as an industry manages to sort it out, or you bypass the two black holes and you deal directly with the customer, with the consumer, because the consumer, I can promise you, gets a very inferior product that will not be tolerated in any other industries.
Okay, that brings us to the solution side of things. And then again, I want to open the microphone. What do you think? Is it more the search interface? Is it the metadata in the background? Who is responsible? Who should work together? What's your take on this?
Who's to blame?
Anybody who wants to? No, not in the moment. Yeah.
Philippe, now does this program, does it interface with existing platforms? Like, for instance, could a label just run their catalog that they have on iTunes or on eMusic and just have that scrub it?
I've not interfaced it with anything as of now because it's a new. Right now, you just have a request like any other request that use. It's called REST protocol. It's a techno-geek word, but basically you send a request, you send a text, you get back a structure. Now, once where the text comes from can be piped from anywhere, as long as the text is fed. The same thing, you get the answers, and your IT department will do whatever it wants from that request. So it's very flexible. I mean, you have two pipes. It's how you connect it. We can talk about it. I mean, it's self-standing. I mean, so.
Okay, so problem solved.
Can I ask the audience quickly? I mean, who of you thinks that the current platforms for music discovery work well for classical music? Raise your hands, please.
Easy question.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, great.
Okay.
And who thinks that this is not the case?
Okay. Okay. But what do you think? Where does it get? Where does it get stuck? Where's the problem? I mean, I've seen great metadata coming from labels, and I know that it's not ending up on the platforms. Any ideas there?
Black holes.
Yeah, black holes probably.
Pointing the finger at the distributor.
No, I think it's a little bit as pointed out later. This metaphor of if you live in a flat with one flatmate or with two. If you live in a flat with one flatmate and there are some dishes that are not washed in the kitchen, everybody involved knows who did wash the dishes because you know what you used and what you washed. If there's two flatmates of yours and more, and two of them meet in the kitchen, you can always say, must have been the other one, and they are responsible. I think that's a little bit the situation we have here. Or is somebody saying, I think this party should now take the first step, and what should they do? Does somebody have a suggestion? What is the most important pressing action that should be taken? Chris, you want to say something?
Well, we retail downloads, amongst other things, and from our perspective, one of the problems that we have is that we can however well we display the download on the website, when someone's downloaded it to their machine, we don't know what media player they're going to use to play it back. So there's almost a compromise in the metadata you send on with the files so that it will work in their player. You have to put the work, for example, in the track because they won't be able to display the work otherwise. I think as we move, assuming the market seems to be moving more to a streaming model, and assuming that does continue, in a way that problem goes because the person who provided the streaming service is the same as the retailer or the DSP. And so they can control, like iTunes can control the whole experience from beginning to end, a streaming service is controlled all the way through from the retailer. So we could, for example, if or when we have a streaming service, we could decide exactly how we display the data all the way through the consumer. So I think it's a problem which is sort of going to go away, I think. But I'd like to think that it's probably the retailers who would actually solve it.
Thank you. That's coming from a retailer in a way. That's a brave statement. That's courage. Anybody else? Yeah. That was Chris O'Reilly from Presto Classica, by the way.
I think it cannot really be the label side because the retailers have usually fixed. They say how the data have to be delivered.
The default.
So the label has to deliver the way, or the aggregator has to deliver the way the data are required. So there's no chance on the label side to solve this.
I'm sorry, since I do the metadata for 3 different labels, I have some very strong opinions about this. And first off, it's up to the content provider to make absolutely certain of the accuracy of their information because it's their product that's being sold. If they're not delivering to any part of the distribution chain accurate information, it's their fault that it's not getting to the consumer accurately. The next step is that the secondary parties in the distribution chain, this would be either the aggregators or the platforms themselves, they have to accommodate the labels by allowing them access to a dashboard so that they can correct information that really doesn't exist right now. You know, it's all done in-house. Yeah. That's one of the black holes and trying to get responses from a large digital distribution company is almost impossible. So if there's a mistake, it's there forever. Now, I do have to say one thing about Naxos, who is one of the distributors that I work with, and they have increasingly increased the sophistication of the metadata that they require from their labels. I mean, it used to be like 4 columns where you have the ISCR codes, composer, UPC code, boom. But now they have like 18 columns of metadata that the label provides for each new release. So I think that the physical distributor and the digital distributor from the retail side, they're making progress. They're recognizing that, as I said, that the label needs to carry their own weight.
Thank you.
I'll say, I mean, from the Orchard's perspective, we have what we call a workstation. So labels supply us with their own metadata. They log in, they upload everything. We follow the standards of iTunes, Amazon, Spotify. Those are the requirements that we use. So we do separate work level from movement. Everything is divided up. So you can deliver that way, which is manual. You key in everything into a field that's specific, separating artists, composers, performers, composers, and any other relevant information. The other alternative is basically delivering through database. So you do a spreadsheet which has, I don't know how many columns our spreadsheet has, but it's the same thing that you're talking about. So ultimately, the label does control their metadata coming into our system. And I can only speak from our perspective is that we QA everything before it's going to the stores because we have to for various reasons. And if it's not to standard, if it doesn't have the information that is relevant or necessary for being, approved for delivery, then we ask the label to make corrections, and we have people who know classical music, who myself and a couple of other people, and we prove everything and are very familiar with how that works. So, to that extent, that's why I'm quite positive on what's happening, is because, a lot of work goes into it. I mean, I think, so that these black holes, they're really, it's a tremendous amount of work to ensure that things are accurate going, out to the consumer.
The next step, though, you have no idea. From a label's perspective, okay, you would go to your distribution and you do a good job at the data. Then you turn around and you sell it to retailers. Mm-hmm. That's the second black hole. You don't know what they do, what they accept. So,
what do you mean?
So what I'm trying to say is from a label's perspective, they know what comes out of the house. They have no idea, they should though, how the consumer receives their product. What metadata after all these 2 steps, what comes out really when it's sold by Amazon, Cobers, whoever? And they don't always know. And the problem of players, and most of labels have no idea what players are used. Okay, there's iTunes, but there are many other players in window platforms. And a lot of them, the good ones, you can create custom fields. JRiver, for example, Musici, you can. So what is the problem to actually provide more data? Because in the business, there's all kind of copyright tags which are written, and that's totally useless for the consumer. But nobody bothers to actually write a composition field. How can you have classical music without a composition field? This is, you don't have to be a Nobel Prize scientist to understand that. So why not having that written? And if you'd use a good player, definitely not iPrunes, then you just create a custom field and you'll have composition. So I think that the labels who really owns the quality, especially the beautiful booklet, all that stuff, should know what's going on at the very end. Who cares, the black holes? At the end you're selling to a consumer, not a wholesaler, and you should have your consumer happy. If you read the forums, they're not very happy.
Do you think we know enough about the consumer? I just learned that, for example, Berlin Philharmonic, the digital concert hall that is, made a survey, and the result was that more than half of the people who answered the survey, but it was a lot of people, claimed to be able to read a partition. So it's a very special audience, whereas I think Warner Music, who just announced that streaming exceeded downloads, I think their target groups are probably very different. But also, if you speak to a couple of these players, they don't even know the issues their own services have with classical music sometimes, because it's just a niche compared to what they sell to other genres.
I mean, I think it's sorry to interrupt, but I think it's even worse. I mean, I talked to some of the big streaming services that are out there, and they know that they are not catering for classical music. They know it, but they also they say, okay, well, classical music streaming accounts for 0.8% on our platform. We just launched in another country, and revenue that has the biggest impact. So before they are not as long as there are countries that they can expand to, there's no incentive to invest in classical music. On the other hand, we don't know whether there would be, if it was a proper product, there might be 10% classical music streaming or even 15%. I mean, if you go look in surveys in the UK and in Germany, it actually suggests that there are a lot more people wanting to listen to classical music. Sorry.
I suspect that 0.8% number is absurd. Are they counting the number of tracks actually streamed, or are they counting the total amount of time? Because if it's tracks that versus total amount of time, it means total amount of time streamed is up to 3.3 or 4 or 5%.
Yeah, I'm sure they're counting tracks because they're not counting time.
Which is not insignificant, and of course we're getting screwed on that whole deal because I have taken most of my content off of streaming.
Who are you? Can you?
Dean Gaudet from Orlicht Audiovisual. I have 4 tracks that I allow E1 to stream, and it's only because they have real hooks and they might encourage people to actually buy the CD. But we're essentially getting screwed, and a big part of it is that it's a combination of time, and it's a combination of not being able to find the music that I would want to find on Spotify or Pandora. And I actually have come up with a solution that probably will not catch on, but that anybody who's involved with putting out compact discs might consider. There's a tool that is almost universally used these days for mastering called DDP Sonoris. And if there were a uniform drag and drop set of metadata for all of the common core repertoire, where you could just pull over one title, a Symphony No. 5 by Beethoven, and it fills in all 4 fields automatically, or the Goldberg variations, it fills in all 32 automatically. Imagine the amount of time that saves. If there were such a tool, that could be used to leverage Spotify and Pandora and every other pirate out there to get their information correct.
Chris, you wanted to say something, or add to?
I just wanted to pick up on this tracks versus time things. It's often quoted as being classical tracks are much longer than pop tracks. And I'm not sure that's the case. Because there's a lot of very short
Yeah, there's
classical
leader,
tracks.
for example, that are 2-3 minutes long.
Yeah, and there's operas have got recitatives which last less than a minute, oratorios, and I think that's I haven't done research myself, but I know some people who have, and it comes out within the same minute. I think it's 4 minutes something to 4 minutes something across the whole catalogue.
Yeah, we have the same on our database. We have 10,000 recordings in there, and we are on average about 8 point something minutes.
Okay, well, I think across a bigger catalogue of millions of recordings, the average across things that are classified as classical and non-classical is actually very similar.
No.
Thank you. There's a lot of open questions also towards the consumer. Maybe Heloisa Fischer of Viva Musica.
I'd just like to bring another point to the discussion, because we're talking here about who is responsible for the mess of the data. Is it the label, the aggregator, the platform? And I wonder if the consumer could be somehow involved in cleaning the mess. Is crowdsourcing a possibility?
All right, I have an answer.
Trackipedia.
No, there is the major, if you put a CD to be ripped as a ripper, the major service that's free called FreeDB. And that was done by, actually the guy was even smarter. He made people work to actually fill data, and then he sold the thing to Grace Notes for $2 million. But anyway, it's done by people. The quality is horrid. It's free.
I was just going to say the same thing. I mean, Gracenote is crowdsourced, and it's a nightmare.
So it's cheap because people work at night for free, but
I mean,
the quality is awful.
There are brilliant companies out there, like Decibel by even Stein, for example. They do a brilliant job plowing through the web and tagging whatever they can. But they have a hard time finding companies that actually want to use that metadata.
How would the ideal we talked about the term journey, the ideal middle of the road solution look? If I go and I know some, I wanted to compare interpretations of La Mer orchestral, and I couldn't do it through many services that I use properly. Took me too long, so I left them aside and I went to browse blogs and practically Google the question, and then I could go back to the services and find the exact pieces that I now knew I was looking for. Wouldn't that be great if a service would tell me, okay, you obviously listen to two different versions of that piece. Here are more, and that's what people say about it. Is that possible, or what's your?
Yeah, it's absolutely possible. I mean, we're doing it. It's again, you have to if the tagging is right, if you can differentiate between works and performers or composers, then you can obviously go from one recording. Oh, that's that composer, Beethoven. What else has he composed? Oh, that's interesting. Or even come up with recommendations. And obviously, it's again a topic of big data then to come up with recommendation algorithms. Once the metadata is there, and you have a platform and user interface that is designed for classical music, then it's not rocket science. I think it's sort of the classical music industry, they have to urge the big players basically to adapt and to come up with interfaces within their existing services that account for those characteristics of classical music.
I have an idea, maybe a little bit strange and dangerous, but maybe we should pay for data. It means I'm a retailer. I have 4 shops, and all the data that I got from my companies, I can do nothing with that because it's not uniform. So with the data that I received, I decide if I take those CDs or not, and then I create my own database in my system. And then my customers ask, Mark, can you not find in your data the details of every CD? I say no, because if I would like to do that, I have to engage one people more, and it's too expensive. So an idea could be, maybe it's dangerous to think like that, an idea could be that there is a company where everybody gives the basic data, we put it uniform in that company, and everybody buys the whole data there. And I think this or another kind of structure where one central database where everything is together, it's probably the only solution for the different ways of writing languages and everything we have.
Okay, I have one more remark, or we are running out of time. Maybe if you could keep it short, we still can do that, and then we'll be around for a couple more minutes, I assume, for questions, and then. Sure. But we need to, as James Rhodes put it in the live showcases yesterday evening, saying they break a finger for every 5 minutes that you exceed. So we don't actually do that, but it's a good plan.
Hi everyone, I'm Katarina Nyberg from the Sibelius 150th anniversary in Finland. And for example, I actually have a background in semantic web and data knowledge and extraction and things like, and artificial intelligence. And I have a colleague in this field who has a startup now called, the old name which I like is Knowledge Pipes, but it's kind of like just data extraction. And when I told them that, okay, I have a selection of, I have links to all the articles around the world online that mention Sibelius in like Jean Sibelius, not the software. But the sentiment analysis is a bit weird. Most of it's in Chinese. And he said, no, that's no problem. We'll just extract use DBpedia. We'll extract the keywords. We'll make clusters for you. We'll know which one is a review, which one is something else, in which content is Sibelius mentioned. And he asked me, so as a startup person, I'm going to ask you one simple question. If we do this, who's the customer? And I said, well, Sibelius 150th anniversary. Okay, we'll do it for free. So this is also something we should not underestimate the value of our classical music organizations' PR value for these new companies that all try to just, they have the skills, they do it themselves, and he has like a job that and he supports himself. So they can really like just do these things for them, and it's a great showcase for them for other industries.
A journalist, Martin Karich from Gramophone, maybe a closing remark? That's your job.
Well, there we are. What pressure. Well, it is a general observation, which therefore doesn't have to be answered, so maybe it's a good one. Now, when we're talking about what people are looking for in metadata, we've talked a lot about composer and work and track information. The one bit that doesn't seem to be part of that is label identity. Now, when I started collecting music, label identity was incredibly important in terms of the trust that you give to a label, the identity they would create, the journey it would take you on, and all the discussions about metadata seem to just sort of neutralize and erode that. And it doesn't seem to be part of either the expectations of what people might be searching on, or actually the kind of information they might get back. It might be that only the editor of a magazine like Gramophone cares about such things. But on the other hand, I think there's something sad in there. Something's being lost.
The publishers at this field.
But it's great that you bring it up. Sorry, but you're absolutely right, and it's something that is really important. And for example, on our platform, the label is always featured. You can also search for the label. We also track, when was it recorded, who was the producer, who was the sound engineer. So it's there for the people who want it. We will see how many actually do, but it's there.
I actually agree with that. I think if there's one field that would benefit sort of the greater industry, especially the independents, it's probably label search. I mean, I think eMusic a long time ago built that in, and it actually it was great. But eMusic is obviously
I thoroughly disagree. I actually think that label identity, as we knew it back when I was actually collecting vinyl and CDs, is pretty much dead. And I'm seeing it with my own label, because the label identity has gone from something that you associate with a physical product that has a certain quality and a certain kind of music, has been transformed into an interactive experience through Facebook and Twitter, where the label I started has built a community of fans. And it's a very different game now. When you're looking at label identity, it is more the international community, people that I now regularly email that are just regular average people or professional musicians as far away as Korea, Taiwan, South Africa. But I did have a little label identity problem a couple of weeks ago with my aggregator. They will not go named at this point, E1. I got an email from a collector in Finland, believe it or not, who thought that there was a new Maureen Forrester reissue on my label. It turns out that somebody at E1 had pressed the wrong button, and instead of putting Vanguard Classics into the label field, had put Urlicht into the label field. I was able, of course, to straighten that out. We found out because it was on Amazon in both Germany and the US. The situation was remedied quite quickly, but in that case of mistaken label identity, I helped my good friends at Vanguard sell an item.
I play the guitar. I can have one finger broken, and that's all of it. So thank you all very much. Thank you for the last word, and thank you for being here and continue the discussion.